Tae-jin Yoon never imagined that a single bet would shatter everything he thought he knew about power, control, and love. But on a cold November evening in Manhattan, as he stood in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, he made a wager that would change his life forever. The woman he married couldn't speak, or so everyone believed. What she revealed on their wedding night would break him in ways no business deal ever could. Tae-jin Yoon was a man who commanded attention the moment he entered any room. At 34, he was the heir to Yoon Industries, one of South Korea's most powerful conglomerates, with operations spanning technology, real estate, and luxury goods. His family's empire was worth over $40 billion, a figure that placed them among the elite chaebols that dominated Korean business. But Tae-jin didn't live in Seoul anymore. 3 years ago, he'd relocated to New York City to oversee the American expansion of Yoon Industries. The official story was strategic, establishing a stronger presence in the Western market. The truth was more complicated. Tae-jin had fled Korea to escape the suffocating expectations of his father, Chairman Yoon, a man whose sole measure of success was profit margins and family legacy. In New York, Tae-jin lived in a world of glass and steel. His penthouse on the Upper East Side was a monument to wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows, imported Italian marble, furniture that cost more than most people's homes. Yet despite the luxury surrounding him, Tae-jin felt nothing. He'd built walls around himself so high that even he couldn't remember what it felt like to be vulnerable. That November evening, Tae-jin stood in his private club, the Metropolitan, sipping whiskey with his closest associates. The atmosphere was thick with cigar smoke and the low hum of conversation. These men, investment bankers, hedge fund managers, real estate moguls, were his peers, though none of them truly knew him. "Tae-jin, you're too serious," laughed Marcus Whitmore, a brash Wall Street trader who'd made millions betting against failing companies. "You need to loosen up. Take a risk for once that isn't calculated to the decimal point." Tae-jin raised an eyebrow, his expression cool. "I take risks every day, Marcus. That's how fortunes are built." "Business risks don't count," Marcus shot back, leaning forward with a mischievous grin. "I'm talking about something personal, something that makes your blood pump." "What did you have in mind?" Tae-jin asked, more out of boredom than genuine interest. Marcus's eyes gleamed. "A bet. You and I both know you could have any woman you want. Models, actresses, socialites. But I bet you wouldn't have the guts to marry someone unexpected. Someone who doesn't fit your usual type." The other men at the table leaned in, sensing entertainment. "And what exactly would I gain from this bet?" Tae-jin asked, his voice measured. $2 million, Marcus said, raising his glass. "Cash. But here's the catch. You have to stay married for at least 6 months. No annulment, no divorce until the time's up." Tae-jin's jaw tightened slightly. It was an absurd proposal, juvenile even. But something about Marcus's smug expression irritated him. Tae-jin Yoon never backed down from a challenge, no matter how ridiculous. "Who's the woman?" Tae-jin asked. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos before turning the screen toward Tae-jin. "She works at your building. A maid. Name's Claire Bennett. She's been cleaning your office for months, though I doubt you've ever noticed her." Tae-jin studied the image. The woman was plain-looking, brown hair pulled back into a practical bun, simple clothes, no makeup. But it wasn't her appearance that caught his attention. It was the note Marcus added casually. "Oh, and one more thing," Marcus said with a grin. "She's mute. Hasn't spoken a word in years. Something about trauma, I heard. So at least you won't have to deal with nagging." The other men laughed, but Tae-jin didn't. He stared at the photo, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. 6 months, Tae-jin said finally, "and you'll transfer the money the day after the wedding." Marcus extended his hand. "Deal." They shook, sealing a wager that would unravel both their lives. The next morning, Tae-jin's assistant, Rebecca, stood in his office with a tablet, reviewing the day's schedule. She was a sharp woman in her late 20s, efficient and unflappable. "There's one more thing," Tae-jin said, not looking up from his laptop. "I need you to arrange a meeting with Claire Bennett. She works in housekeeping. Rebecca blinked, surprised. The maid? Yes. May I ask why? Tae-jin's eyes met hers, cold and unreadable. Personal matter. Just set it up. Rebecca nodded, making a note. She'd worked for Tae-jin long enough to know not to ask questions. That afternoon, Claire Bennett received a message that Mr. Yoon wanted to see her. Confusion washed over her face as she read the text on the staff communication system. In the 3 years she'd worked at the building, she'd never spoken to him. Not that she could speak at all. Claire was 28 years old, though her quiet demeanor made her seem younger. She'd lost her voice at 19 after a traumatic incident she never talked about, not even through the sign language she'd learned. Most people assumed she was mute from birth and left it at that. It was easier than explaining. She took the service elevator up to the executive floor, her heart pounding. The hallways here were different. Plush carpeting, soft lighting, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. She'd cleaned these spaces countless times, but always when they were empty. Rebecca met her at the entrance to Tae-jin's office. Mr. Yoon will see you now. Claire stepped inside, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. The office was massive, with windows overlooking the city and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. And there, behind a glass desk, sat Tae-jin Yoon. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he simply studied her. Her worn uniform, her nervous posture, the way she avoided direct eye contact. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Claire hesitated, then sat down, her back straight, despite her discomfort. Tae-jin leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Bennett. One that will change your life." Claire's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. She couldn't. "I need a wife," Tae-jin continued, his tone as businesslike as if he were discussing a merger. Not a real marriage, of course. Just a legal arrangement that lasts 6 months. In exchange, I'll pay you $1 million. Claire's breath caught. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Tae-jin slid a folder across the desk. "The terms are simple. We marry, you live in my penthouse for 6 months, and when the time is up, we divorce. You walk away with the money, and I win a bet. No strings attached." Claire opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the contract inside. The numbers were real. $1 million. Enough to pay off her grandmother's medical bills, enough to start over, enough to finally escape the crushing poverty she'd known her entire life. But marriage? To this man, this cold, powerful stranger who looked at her like she was a piece on a chessboard. Tae-jin watched her carefully. "I know you can't speak, Miss Bennett, but you can read and write. If you agree, sign the last page." Claire's hands shook as she held the pen. Every instinct told her this was wrong, that she was selling herself. But the image of her grandmother in that hospital bed, the mounting bills, the eviction notice on her apartment door, it all weighed on her. She signed. Tae-jin took the contract, barely glancing at her signature before standing. "The wedding is in 3 days. Rebecca will handle the arrangements. You'll move into the penthouse the night before." Claire stood as well, her heart pounding. She wanted to ask questions, to understand what she'd just agreed to, but the words wouldn't come. They never did. As she turned to leave, Tae-jin spoke again. "One more thing, Miss Bennett. This is a business arrangement. Don't expect anything beyond what's in that contract." Claire nodded and walked out, the door closing softly behind her. Alone in his office, Tae-jin poured himself a drink, staring out at the city. He told himself this was just another transaction, another move in a game he always won. But deep down, something about the way Claire had looked at him, like he was both her salvation and her doom, unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. The wedding took place on a grey Wednesday afternoon at City Hall. There were no flowers, no guests, no music. Just Tae-jin in a tailored black suit, Claire in a simple white dress Rebecca had bought for her, and 2 witnesses pulled from the courthouse staff. The officiant, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, recited the vows in a monotone voice. Tae-jin repeated his lines with the same detachment he used in business meetings. When it was Claire's turn, the officiant paused, glancing at the note Rebecca had provided. "The bride is unable to speak," the officiant said. "A nod will suffice." Claire nodded, her hands gripping a small bouquet of grocery store daisies Rebecca had handed her that morning. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said. Tae-jin hesitated for the briefest moment before leaning in. The kiss was perfunctory, cold, lasting no more than a second. Claire's lips were soft but unresponsive, and when he pulled away, her eyes were fixed on the floor. They signed the papers in silence. As Tae-jin's pen scratched across the marriage certificate, he felt nothing. This was just another contract, another deal closed. But Claire, standing beside him, felt the weight of what she'd done settle over her like a heavy coat. She was married. To a man who didn't love her, didn't know her, didn't even see her as a person. That evening, a black car pulled up to Claire's tiny studio apartment in Queens. Rebecca had arranged for movers to pack her few belongings, some clothes, a handful of books, a photograph of her grandmother. Everything Claire owned fit into 2 suitcases. The drive to the penthouse was silent. Claire sat in the back seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. The contrast between her world and Tae-jin's was staggering. In Queens, buildings were crumbling, streets were loud, and every dollar mattered. On the Upper East Side, everything was pristine, quiet, insulated from the struggles of ordinary people. When they arrived, a doorman opened the car door with a polite smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Yoon." The name jolted Claire. Mrs. Yoon. It didn't feel real. The elevator ride to the penthouse was long and silent. When the doors opened, Claire stepped into a space that took her breath away. The living room was enormous, with white leather couches, abstract art on the walls, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The city sparkled below like a sea of stars. Tae-jin was already there, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered. "Your room is down the hall," he said without looking at her. "Second door on the right. Rebecca stocked it with everything you'll need." Claire hesitated, then walked down the hallway. The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment had been. A king-sized bed dominated the space, draped in silk sheets. There was a walk-in closet filled with clothes in her size. Designer dresses, shoes, accessories. Everything chosen by someone who didn't know her at all. She set her suitcases down and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. This was her life now, at least for 6 months. Back in the living room, Tae-jin refilled his glass. He told himself this was fine. Claire would stay out of his way, the 6 months would pass quickly, and he'd collect his winnings. Simple. But as the hours ticked by and the apartment remained silent, something gnawed at him. He'd never lived with anyone before, and the presence of another person, even one who couldn't speak, felt strange. Around midnight, Tae-jin walked down the hallway toward his own bedroom. As he passed Claire's door, he paused. A sliver of light escaped from beneath it. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped himself. What would he even say? He lowered his hand and continued to his room. Inside, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wedding ring on her finger. It was a simple platinum band, expensive but impersonal. She twisted it slowly, feeling its weight. And then, for the first time in years, she felt the urge to speak. Not sign, not write, but speak. The words sat on her tongue, heavy and unused. But she swallowed them down. Not yet. Not here. She turned off the light and lay down in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, her new life would begin, and she had no idea what it would bring. The first week of their arrangement was marked by careful distance. Tae-jin left for work before dawn, often not returning until late evening. Claire spent her days in the penthouse, unsure what to do with herself. She wasn't a maid here. She wasn't anything. Rebecca checked in daily, providing instructions on household matters and schedules. Mr. Yoon prefers his coffee black, no sugar. Dinner should be ready by 8 if he's home. The cleaning service comes on Tuesdays. Claire nodded along, writing responses in a small notebook she carried everywhere. "I can cook," she wrote. Rebecca looked surprised. "That's not necessary. Mr. Yoon usually eats out or orders in." "I'd like to," Claire wrote. Rebecca shrugged. "I'll let him know." That evening, Claire prepared a simple meal: roasted chicken, vegetables, rice. She set the table carefully, folding napkins the way she'd seen in movies. When Tae-jin came home, he stopped short at the sight. "What's this?" he asked. Claire gestured to the food, then to the notebook she'd left on the table. "I made dinner." Tae-jin's jaw tightened. This wasn't part of the arrangement. He didn't need her to cook for him, to play house like they were a real couple. But the food smelled good, and he was hungry. He sat down without a word and began eating. Claire sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't eat, just watched him with those quiet, observant eyes. The silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward. Finally, Tae-jin set down his fork. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You're not my servant." Claire picked up her notebook. "I know. I wanted to." Tae-jin studied her for a long moment, trying to understand. But understanding required caring, and caring was something he'd trained himself not to do. "Fine," he said, standing. "Thank you for the meal." He disappeared into his study, leaving Claire alone at the table. As the days passed, small routines began to form. Claire cooked dinner most nights, though Tae-jin rarely acknowledged it beyond a brief nod. She kept the penthouse tidy, not because she had to, but because it gave her something to do. Tae-jin, for his part, tried to ignore her presence. But it was impossible. He'd come home to find fresh flowers on the dining table, or a book he'd been reading moved from the couch to the coffee table, with a bookmark carefully placed. Little signs that someone else lived there. One evening, Tae-jin found Claire on the terrace, standing by the railing and looking out at the city. The November wind was cold, and she'd wrapped herself in a thin cardigan that did little to protect her from the chill. He stood in the doorway, watching her. She seemed lost in thought, her expression soft and distant. For the first time, he noticed details he'd missed before. The gentle slope of her shoulders, the way her hair caught the light, the quiet strength in the way she stood. "You'll catch a cold," he said, stepping outside. Claire turned, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. Tae-jin shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was automatic, not romantic, but Claire's eyes widened at the unexpected kindness. "I don't need you getting sick," he said, his tone clipped. "It would complicate things." Claire pulled the jacket tighter around herself, feeling the warmth of it, the faint scent of his cologne, cedar and something crisp, expensive. She pulled out her notebook. "Thank you." Tae-jin nodded and turned to go back inside, but something made him pause. "Why did you agree to this?" he asked, not looking at her. "The money." Claire's hand hovered over the paper. She could write something simple, something that confirmed his assumption. But instead, she wrote the truth. "My grandmother is sick. The bills were too much." Tae-jin read the words, and for a moment, something shifted in his chest. He'd assumed she was greedy, opportunistic. But this was desperation, the kind he'd never known. "I see," he said quietly. They stood in silence for a while, the city noise a distant hum below them. Finally, Tae-jin spoke again. "You can stay out here as long as you want. Just don't freeze to death." He went inside, leaving Claire alone with his jacket and a strange, unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the fabric. As the second month began, the walls between them started to crack. It happened in small ways. A shared glance over morning coffee. The way Tae-jin paused when he saw Claire reading on the couch. The fact that he stopped working late just to avoid her. One Saturday morning, Tae-jin woke to the smell of pancakes. He walked into the kitchen to find Claire at the stove, flipping batter with practiced ease. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the steam rising from the pan. "You're up early," he said. Claire turned, offering a small smile. She gestured to the plate she'd prepared. Pancakes, fresh fruit, syrup. Tae-jin sat down at the counter, watching her work. There was something calming about the scene, something domestic that he'd never experienced before. When she placed the plate in front of him, their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away. "These are good," Tae-jin said after the first bite, and he meant it. Claire's smile widened just a fraction. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that almost felt normal. Tae-jin started coming home earlier, finding excuses to spend time in the common areas instead of hiding in his study. Claire began leaving him small notes around the penthouse, reminders, observations, once even a joke that made him chuckle despite himself. "Why don't scientists trust atoms?" she'd written. "Because they make up everything." Tae-jin had stared at the note for a full minute before cracking a rare smile. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch watching the city lights, Tae-jin found himself talking, really talking, in a way he hadn't in years. "My father wants me back in Seoul," he said quietly. "He thinks I'm wasting my time here, playing at independence. But if I go back, I'll be trapped. Arranged marriage, board meetings, a life where every decision is made for me." Claire listened, her eyes on him, not judging, just present. "I thought coming here would give me freedom," Tae-jin continued. "But I'm just as trapped. Different cage, same bars." Claire picked up her notebook. "Maybe freedom isn't a place. Maybe it's a choice." Tae-jin read the words, feeling something crack open inside him. She was right. He'd been running from cages his whole life without realizing he was building new ones. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said softly. Claire's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. That night, as Tae-jin lay in bed, he realized something that terrified him. He was starting to care. 3 months into their marriage, everything changed on a quiet December evening. Snow had begun to fall over New York, blanketing the city in soft white. Claire stood at the window, watching the flakes drift past the glass, her breath fogging slightly against the cold pane. Tae-jin came home earlier than usual, carrying a folder of documents he needed to review. But when he saw her standing there, silhouetted against the window with snow falling behind her, he stopped. She looked beautiful. The thought hit him like a punch to the chest. He'd spent months telling himself this was just a transaction, that Claire was just a means to an end. But somewhere along the way, she'd become more than that. She'd become someone he looked for when he came home. Someone whose notes made him smile. Someone whose quiet presence had filled the empty spaces in his life without him even realizing it. "Claire," he said, her name feeling strange and intimate on his tongue. She turned, surprised. He rarely used her name. Tae-jin walked over to her, stopping just a few feet away. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and he could see the questions there, the uncertainty. "I don't think I can do this anymore," he said quietly. Claire's face fell. She reached for her notebook, hands shaking. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Tae-jin said quickly. "No, that's not what I meant." He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find words for feelings he'd spent a lifetime suppressing. "I mean, I can't keep pretending this is just a contract. I can't keep pretending I don't—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Claire's eyes widened. She took a step closer, her notebook forgotten. Tae-jin looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time in his adult life, he let himself be vulnerable. "I care about you," he said, the admission raw and unsteady. "And I don't know what to do with that." Claire's breath hitched. She set down her notebook and did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and touched his face. Her hand was soft against his cheek, trembling slightly. Tae-jin closed his eyes, leaning into the touch, feeling something inside him unravel. When he opened his eyes again, Claire was crying. Silent tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. She picked up her notebook with shaking hands and wrote 3 words. "I care too." Tae-jin felt his chest tighten. He'd built his entire life on control, on keeping people at a distance. But this woman, this quiet, strong woman, who'd been sold to him in a bet, had broken through every defense he had. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Then let's stop pretending," he said softly. That night, they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They sat together on the couch, Claire's head resting on Tae-jin's shoulder, watching the snow fall over the city. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Tae-jin felt at peace. But peace, as he would soon learn, was fragile. The following weeks were the happiest of Claire's life. Tae-jin stopped treating their marriage like a business arrangement and started treating it like something real. He took her to dinner at quiet restaurants, walked with her through Central Park as snow crunched beneath their feet, held her hand when they watched movies late at night. Claire blossomed under his attention. She smiled more, laughed more, silent laughter that shook her shoulders and made her eyes crinkle. She started wearing the clothes Rebecca had bought her, not because she had to, but because she wanted Tae-jin to see her. And he did see her. For the first time in his life, Tae-jin saw someone completely. But as their bond deepened, something else began to shift. One evening, as Claire prepared dinner, she heard raised voices coming from Tae-jin's study. The door was slightly ajar, and though she knew she shouldn't, she moved closer. "I don't care what you want, father," Tae-jin was saying, his voice hard. "I'm not coming back to Seoul. Not now. Not ever." There was a pause. Then Tae-jin's voice rose again. "This has nothing to do with duty. I'm building something here, something that's mine." Another pause. "Yes, I'm married. No, it's none of your business." Claire's heart sank. She hadn't realized Tae-jin's father didn't know about her, or if he did, that he disapproved. "She's not," Tae-jin began, then stopped. "You don't get to talk about her like that." Claire heard the phone slam down. She quickly moved back to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she gripped the counter. When Tae-jin emerged a few minutes later, his face was tight with anger. But when he saw Claire, his expression softened. "I'm sorry you heard that," he said quietly. Claire picked up her notebook. "Your father. He wants me back in Korea. He's threatening to cut off my access to the company if I don't comply." "Because of me?" Tae-jin crossed to her, taking the pen from her hand and setting it down. "Because he thinks he owns me. But he doesn't. Not anymore." Claire wanted to believe him, but she saw the strain in his eyes, the weight of the choice he was making. That night, as they lay in bed, Tae-jin had started sleeping in her room weeks ago, though they never discussed it. Claire turned to him. In the darkness, she did something she hadn't done in 9 years. She spoke. "Tae-jin," she whispered, her voice rough and unused, barely more than a breath. Tae-jin sat up so fast he nearly fell out of bed. "What? Did you just—" Claire sat up too, tears streaming down her face. "I can speak," she whispered. "I've always been able to. I couldn't. Not after." She broke off, her voice cracking. Tae-jin pulled her into his arms, his heart pounding. "Why now?" he asked. "Why tell me now?" Claire's voice was so quiet he could barely hear it. "Because I love you. And I can't keep hiding." Tae-jin felt something inside him shatter and rebuild all at once. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, seeing her in a completely new light. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you," Claire said, stronger this time. And Tae-jin kissed her, not the cold, perfunctory kiss from their wedding, but something real and desperate and full of all the feelings he'd been too afraid to name. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Tae-jin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "God help me. I love you too." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, knowing that everything had changed. But neither of them knew just how much. The next morning, Claire woke to find Tae-jin already dressed and standing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. His expression was grim. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll handle it." He hung up and turned to find Claire watching him, concern in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice still soft and hesitant. Tae-jin crossed to her, sitting on the edge of the bed. My father is coming to New York. He'll be here tomorrow. Claire's stomach dropped. Because of me? Because he wants to meet the woman who convinced me to throw away my future, Tae-jin said, a bitter edge to his voice. His words, not mine. Claire looked down at her hands. What if he's right? What if I am ruining your life? Tae-jin took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. You're the only good thing in my life. Don't ever think otherwise. But as he said it, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts. What would happen when his father arrived? When the full weight of his family's expectations came crashing down? Could love really be enough? The meeting was set for the following evening at the penthouse. Claire spent the day in a state of silent panic. She wanted to make a good impression, to show Chairman Yoon that she was worthy of his son. But she knew the truth. She was a housemaid who couldn't even speak, or at least that's what everyone believed. What could she possibly offer a family like the Yoons? Tae-jin sensed her anxiety and pulled her close as they waited. It'll be fine, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. At precisely 7 o'clock, the elevator doors opened, and Chairman Yoon stepped into the penthouse. He was in his early 60s, tall and imposing, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Father, Tae-jin said, his voice carefully neutral. Tae-jin. Chairman Yoon's gaze swept the penthouse before landing on Claire. And this must be your wife. There was a pause, heavy with judgment. Claire stepped forward and bowed deeply, the traditional Korean greeting Tae-jin had taught her. She held the bow longer than necessary, hoping to show respect. When she straightened, Chairman Yoon was studying her with an unreadable expression. She doesn't speak, he said. It wasn't a question. She does, Tae-jin said, stepping closer to Claire. She just chooses not to, most of the time. Chairman Yoon's eyebrow raised slightly. How convenient. The dinner that followed was agonizing. Claire had prepared a traditional Korean meal, spending hours making sure everything was perfect. But Chairman Yoon barely touched his food, his attention fixed on his son. You understand this is unacceptable, Chairman Yoon said in Korean, clearly assuming Claire couldn't understand. This woman is beneath you, a housemaid. What were you thinking? Tae-jin's jaw clenched. I was thinking that she's the only person who's ever seen me as more than an heir to your empire. Sentiment, Chairman Yoon said dismissively. You'll outgrow it. I'm 34 years old, father. I'm not a child. Then stop acting like one. Chairman Yoon set down his chopsticks with a sharp click. You have responsibilities, a legacy to uphold. This marriage is embarrassing the family. Claire's hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Not in front of this man who looked at her like she was nothing. If you truly cared about her, Chairman Yoon continued, you would let her go. She doesn't belong in our world, and you know it. Something in Tae-jin's chest twisted painfully, because part of him, a small, terrible part, wondered if his father was right. The evening ended in tense silence. When Chairman Yoon finally left, Tae-jin stood at the window, his shoulders rigid. Claire approached him slowly. Tae-jin? He didn't turn. He's wrong, Tae-jin said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is he? Claire asked quietly. Tae-jin turned then, seeing the doubt in her eyes. Don't, he said. Don't let him get in your head. He's your father. He knows you better than anyone. He knows the version of me he created, Tae-jin said. He doesn't know this version. The one who... He stopped, struggling. The one who loves you. Claire stepped closer, taking his hand. I love you too. But maybe he's right. Maybe I'm holding you back. You're not... Your family, your company, your entire future. It all depends on you doing what he says. How can I ask you to give that up? Tae-jin pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. You're not asking. I'm choosing. But even as he said it, the weight of his father's words pressed down on him. Over the next week, cracks began to form. Chairman Yoon didn't leave New York. Instead, he stayed at the plaza and began a campaign to separate Tae-jin and Claire. He sent lawyers with new contracts. He arranged meetings with potential business partners, making it clear that Tae-jin's future in the company depended on his compliance. He even had investigators dig into Claire's background, looking for ammunition. And slowly, inexorably, the pressure began to work. Tae-jin grew distant, staying late at the office, avoiding conversations. When he was home, he was distracted, tense. Claire felt him slipping away and didn't know how to stop it. One night, as they lay in bed, though now with space between them, Claire whispered, "Maybe we should end this." Tae-jin went rigid. "What?" "The 6 months are almost up," Claire said, her voice breaking. "Maybe it's time to let go." "Is that what you want?" "No." The word came out as a sob. "But I can't watch you destroy yourself for me." Tae-jin sat up, turning on the lamp. "So you want to just give up? After everything?" "I want you to be happy," Claire said, tears streaming down her face. "And I don't think you can be happy if you're at war with your family." "I'm at war with myself," Tae-jin said. "Not them. Me." He stood, pacing the room. "All my life, I've done what was expected. I've been the perfect son, the perfect heir, and I've been miserable. You're the first thing I've ever chosen for myself. And now, you want me to give that up." "I don't want you to," Claire said. "But I think you have to." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Tae-jin looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the pain in her eyes. She was sacrificing herself for him, letting him go because she thought it was what he needed. And maybe, a small voice whispered, she was right. "I need some air," Tae-jin said, grabbing his coat and walking out. Claire sat alone in the bedroom, sobbing into her hands, feeling like her heart was being ripped apart. Tae-jin walked the streets of Manhattan for hours, the cold December air biting at his face. He ended up at the Metropolitan, where this whole thing had started. Marcus Whitmore was there, lounging at the bar with a smug expression. "Well, well," Marcus said, "if it isn't the married man. How's domestic bliss treating you?" Tae-jin ordered a whiskey, downing it in one gulp. "It's complicated." "I heard your old man is in town," Marcus said. "Bet he's loving your choice of bride." Tae-jin glared at him. "Shut up, Marcus." "Hey, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You married a mute housemaid on a bet. It was always going to end badly." "It's not like that, isn't it?" Marcus leaned closer. "Come on, Tae-jin. You and I both know you can't actually love her. This was always about winning, about proving you could do whatever you wanted." Tae-jin's hand tightened around his glass. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Marcus smirked. "You're a Yoon. You're not built for love. You're built for power. And the sooner you remember that, the better off you'll be." Tae-jin wanted to hit him, to prove him wrong, but a sick, cold part of him wondered if Marcus was right. What if everything he felt for Claire was just rebellion? What if he was confusing love with the thrill of defying his father? He stood abruptly, throwing money on the bar. "I need to go." He didn't go home. Instead, he went to his office, spending the night staring at the city lights, trying to figure out what he truly wanted. By the time dawn broke, he still didn't have an answer. When Tae-jin finally returned to the penthouse the next morning, he found Claire in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes red from crying. "We need to talk," Tae-jin said. Claire's hands stilled. She turned to face him, fear in her eyes. "I've been thinking," Tae-jin began, his voice carefully controlled. "About what you said. About us." "Tae-jin." "Let me finish." He took a breath. "You were right. This isn't fair to you. You deserve someone who can give you a real life, not someone who's constantly torn between you and his family." Claire's face crumpled. "So that's it. You're choosing them." "I'm choosing to let you go," Tae-jin said, though the words tasted like ash. "The 6 months are almost up anyway. We can end this now, and you can take the money and start over. I don't want the money, Claire said, her voice rising. I want you. You can't have me, Tae-jin said, and he forced himself to sound cold, detached. This was always temporary. We both knew that. Claire stared at him, and he saw the exact moment her heart broke. It mirrored the breaking of his own. Get out, she whispered. Claire! Get out! She was yelling now, tears streaming down her face. If you're going to throw me away, then do it. But don't stand here and pretend this was ever just a contract. Don't you dare. Tae-jin felt his own composure cracking. This is for the best. For who? Claire demanded. For you. For your father. Because it's sure as hell not for me. Tae-jin had no answer. He turned and walked out, leaving Claire sobbing in the kitchen. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The next few days were a blur. Claire moved her things back to a small apartment Rebecca helped her find. The money, all $1 million, was transferred to her account, though she didn't touch it. Tae-jin threw himself into work, accepting every demand his father made. He attended meetings, signed contracts, agreed to return to Seoul within the month. He told himself this was the right choice, that he was protecting Claire from a life she was never meant to live. But every night, alone in the penthouse that now felt cavernous and cold, he ached for her. A week after their separation, Rebecca appeared in Tae-jin's office with an envelope. What's this? From Mrs. Yoon. From Claire, Rebecca corrected herself. She asked me to give it to you. Tae-jin's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with Claire's handwriting. You once told me that freedom is a choice. I thought I understood what you meant, but now I realize you're still choosing your cage, and I can't watch you lock yourself away. I love you. I always will. But love without courage is just longing. I hope someday you find the courage to be free. Claire Tae-jin read the note 3 times, each word cutting deeper. She was right. He'd spent his whole life running from one cage to another, and in the end, he'd chosen the familiar prison over the terrifying freedom she offered. He'd chosen wrong. That night, Tae-jin sat in his empty penthouse, Claire's note clutched in his hand. The city lights blurred as tears he'd been holding back for days finally fell. He'd lost her, and it was his own fault. But somewhere, beneath the pain and regret, a spark of determination began to grow. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could still choose differently. Maybe he could still be free. 2 weeks after their separation, Tae-jin made a decision that would change everything. He walked into his father's hotel suite at the plaza and found Chairman Yoon reviewing financial reports, a cup of tea steaming on the side table. "Father," Tae-jin said, "we need to talk." Chairman Yoon looked up, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Finally come to your senses?" Tae-jin didn't sit. "I'm not coming back to Seoul. I'm not ending my marriage, and I'm not letting you control my life anymore." Chairman Yoon's expression hardened. "Excuse me? You heard me." Tae-jin's voice was steady, certain. "I've spent my entire life trying to be the son you wanted, but I'm done. I'm choosing Claire. I'm choosing the life I want." "You're choosing poverty," Chairman Yoon said coldly. "I'll cut you off completely. No money, no position, no access to the family business. You'll have nothing." "I'll have her," Tae-jin said, "and that's everything." Chairman Yoon stood, his face flushed with anger. "You're a fool. That woman has bewitched you." "That woman loves me," Tae-jin interrupted. "Not my money, not my name, me. And I was an idiot for walking away from that." He turned toward the door, then paused. "You taught me that power is the only thing that matters. But you were wrong. Love matters. Connection matters. Being seen for who you really are, that matters more than any empire." Door. Tae-jin walked out, leaving his father speechless behind him. The first thing Tae-jin did was call Rebecca. "I need Claire's address." "Are you sure about this, sir?" Rebecca asked carefully. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." An hour later, Tae-jin stood outside a modest apartment building in Brooklyn, his heart pounding. He'd rehearsed what he would say 100 times, But now, standing here, every word felt inadequate. He pressed the buzzer. "Hello?" Claire's voice came through, cautious. "It's me," Tae-jin said. "Please, I need to talk to you." There was a long pause. Then the door buzzed open. Tae-jin climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step heavy with hope and fear. When he reached Claire's door, she was already standing there, arms crossed, eyes red-rimmed. "What do you want?" asked, her voice cold. "To apologize," Tae-jin said. "To tell you I was wrong. To ask for another chance." Claire's expression didn't change. "You made your choice." "I made the wrong choice," Tae-jin said desperately. "I was scared. Scared of losing my family, my company, everything I'd ever known. But Claire," his voice broke, "I lost you, and that's worse than anything else I could lose." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. "What changed?" "I realized that I'd rather have nothing with you than everything without you," Tae-jin said. "I told my father I'm staying. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us." "And if he cuts you off?" Claire asked. "If you lose everything?" "Then we'll build something new," Tae-jin said. "Together." Claire stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, she stepped back into her apartment. "Come in." Tae-jin followed her inside. The apartment was tiny, a studio with a small kitchen, a bed in the corner, a single window overlooking the street. It was nothing like the penthouse. But as Tae-jin looked around, he realized something. It felt more like home than anywhere he'd ever lived. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, gesturing for him to sit in the only chair. Instead, Tae-jin knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I love you," he said. "Not because of a bet, not because you challenged me, but because you see me, the real me. And you love that person, flaws and all." Tears streamed down Claire's face. "I love you too," she whispered. "But I'm scared. Scared you'll change your mind again." "I won't," Tae-jin said fiercely. "I swear to you, I won't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, not the impersonal platinum band from their contract wedding, but a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "Marry me," Tae-jin said. "Not because of a bet. Not for 6 months, but for real. For forever." Claire's breath caught. "Tae-jin." "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he said. "But I'm asking anyway. Marry me, Claire. Not as Mrs. Yoon, the contract wife, but as my partner. My equal. The love of my life." Claire looked at the ring, then at Tae-jin's face, vulnerable, hopeful, terrified of her answer, and she smiled through her tears. "Yes." Tae-jin slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he looked up, Claire was pulling him close, kissing him with all the love and forgiveness and hope she'd been holding on to. They held each other for a long time, the world outside fading away. "What happens now?" Claire asked eventually. "Now," Tae-jin said, "we figure it out together." The next few months were hard. Chairman Yoon followed through on his threats, cutting Tae-jin off completely. The board of Yoon Industries voted to remove him from his position, and his access to the family fortune was revoked. For the first time in his life, Tae-jin had to live like an ordinary person. He moved out of the penthouse and into Claire's tiny apartment. He took a job at a small investment firm, working his way up from the bottom. It was humbling. It was difficult. But it was also freeing. Claire went back to school, using part of the $1 million to get her teaching degree. She'd always wanted to work with children, and now, finally, she could. They struggled. There were nights when they ate ramen for dinner and worried about making rent. There were moments when Tae-jin wondered if he'd made the right choice. But then he'd come home to find Claire grading papers at their tiny kitchen table, and she'd look up and smile, and he'd know. This was exactly where he was meant to be. One evening, about 6 months after their reconciliation, Claire had news. "Tae-jin," she said as they sat together on their second-hand couch. "I went to the doctor today." Tae-jin looked up from his laptop, concerned. "Are you okay?" Claire's smile was radiant. I'm pregnant. Tae-jin stared at her, the words not quite registering. Then he laughed, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy, and pulled her into his arms. We're having a baby, he asked, still not quite believing it. We're having a baby, Claire confirmed, tears of happiness in her eyes. Tae-jin held her close, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. They were going to be parents. They were going to build a family. Not because of a contract or a bet, but because they chose to. Because they loved each other. The pregnancy brought new challenges, but also new joys. Tae-jin threw himself into preparing for fatherhood, reading every book he could find, attending every doctor's appointment, holding Claire's hand through morning sickness and midnight cravings. And as her belly grew, so did their love. One night, as they lay in bed with Tae-jin's hand resting on Claire's stomach, feeling the baby kick, Claire spoke. I never thought I'd have this, she said quietly. A family. Someone who loves me. Tae-jin kissed her forehead. You deserve all of this and more. So do you, Claire said, turning to look at him. You gave up everything for me. I didn't give up anything, Tae-jin said. I gained everything. 7 months later, on a warm spring evening, Claire went into labor. Tae-jin rushed her to the hospital, his hands shaking as he gripped hers through every contraction. The labor was long and difficult, but finally, after hours of pushing and pain, their son was born. Tae-jin held the tiny, squirming baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face. The baby had Claire's eyes and his dark hair, and he was the most beautiful thing Tae-jin had ever seen. We did it, Claire whispered, exhausted but glowing. You did it, Tae-jin corrected, leaning down to kiss her. You're incredible. They named the baby Daniel, a strong, simple name that wasn't tied to either of their complicated pasts. As Tae-jin sat in the hospital chair, watching Claire sleep with Daniel in her arms, he felt a peace he'd never known. This was his family, his future, his home, and he'd never been happier. A year after Daniel's birth, Tae-jin received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was his father. Chairman Yoon looked older, smaller somehow. The arrogance that had always defined him seemed diminished. Father, Tae-jin said, standing. What are you doing here? Chairman Yoon didn't answer right away. He looked around the modest office, a far cry from the executive suite Tae-jin had once occupied. I heard you had a son, Chairman Yoon said finally. Tae-jin's jaw tightened. Yes. I'd like to meet him. Tae-jin studied his father carefully. Why? Chairman Yoon sighed, and for the first time, Tae-jin saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. He saw regret. Because I made a mistake, Chairman Yoon said quietly. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was teaching you strength, but all I did was drive you away. You were right. Love does matter, and I've spent the last year watching you build a life with nothing but that, and you're happier than I've ever seen you. Tae-jin didn't know what to say. I'm not asking you to come back, Chairman Yoon continued. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking to meet my grandson, to be part of your life, if you'll let me. Tae-jin looked at his father, this man who'd controlled every aspect of his life for so long, and saw him not as a tyrant, but as a broken man trying to make amends. I'll talk to Claire, Tae-jin said finally. It's her decision too. Chairman Yoon nodded. Of course. That evening, Tae-jin told Claire about his father's visit. She listened quietly, bouncing Daniel on her knee. What do you want to do? She asked. Tae-jin shook his head. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him to stay away. But another part wants to give him a chance, Claire finished. Is that wrong? Claire reached out, taking his hand. No. Family is complicated. And Daniel deserves to know his grandfather if your father is willing to change. And if he's not, then we set boundaries, Claire said firmly. We protect our family first. Tae-jin pulled her close, grateful once again for her wisdom and strength. A week later, Chairman Yoon came to their apartment. It was awkward at first, the wealthy patriarch sitting in their tiny living room, holding his grandson with uncertain hands. But as Daniel grabbed his grandfather's finger and smiled, something in Chairman Yoon's expression softened. "He has your eyes," Chairman Yoon said to Tae-jin. "He has Claire's smile," Tae-jin replied, looking at his wife. Chairman Yoon watched the way they looked at each other, the love, the partnership, the respect, and he finally understood what he'd been missing his whole life. "I'm sorry," Chairman Yoon said suddenly, "for everything, for trying to control you, for not seeing that you were right." Tae-jin met his father's eyes. "I'm sorry too, for shutting you out completely." It wasn't a complete reconciliation. There were still wounds to heal, boundaries to establish, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was enough. 2 years later, Tae-jin and Claire stood in a small community center in Brooklyn, surrounded by family and friends. It was their vow renewal, a real wedding, not the cold transaction of years ago. Claire wore a simple white dress, her hair down, and flowers woven through it. Tae-jin wore a suit, but his tie was slightly crooked because Daniel had been playing with it earlier. Chairman Yoon sat in the front row, holding Daniel, who was now a rambunctious toddler. Beside him sat Claire's grandmother, finally healthy after the medical treatments Claire's money had provided. Rebecca was there too, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Even Marcus Whitmore had shown up, looking genuinely moved. As they exchanged vows, real ones this time, written from the heart, Tae-jin looked into Claire's eyes and saw his entire future. "I promise to choose you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day, in every way. Not because of a bet or a contract, but because loving you is the easiest and hardest thing I've ever done. And I wouldn't change a single moment." Claire smiled through her tears. "I promise to speak my truth," she said, her voice clear and strong. "To never hide who I am again, and to love you with everything I have, for as long as we both live." They kissed as their friends and family applauded, and Tae-jin felt a completeness he'd never thought possible. This was real. This was forever. After the ceremony, as they danced their first dance, something they'd never done at their original wedding, Claire rested her head on Tae-jin's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up your inheritance, your position?" Tae-jin pulled back just enough to look at her face. "Never. Not even once." Even when things were hard?" "Especially then," Tae-jin said, "because the hard things reminded me that this was real, that we were building something together, not just coasting on wealth and privilege." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Tae-jin said, pulling her close again. As they swayed to the music, Tae-jin thought about that night so long ago. The bet, the contract, the cold wedding at City Hall. He thought about how much had changed, how much they'd both grown. And he thought about their wedding night 2 years ago, when Claire had finally spoken for the first time in years. She'd broken him that night, shattered every defense, every wall he'd built, and in doing so, she'd set him free. As the song ended and their friends surrounded them with congratulations, Tae-jin caught his father's eye across the room. Chairman Yoon nodded, a small smile on his face. It was approval, finally. But more than that, it was respect. Tae-jin nodded back, then turned his attention to Claire and Daniel, who was demanding to be picked up by his father. This was his family, his real family, built not on contracts or obligations, but on love. And it was worth more than any empire. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Tae-jin and Claire stood at the entrance, thanking everyone for coming. When the last guest had gone, they were finally alone, except for Daniel, who had fallen asleep on a pile of coats in the corner. Tae-jin carefully picked up his son, cradling him against his chest. Claire gathered their things, and together they walked out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, lit only by street lamps and the soft glow of apartment windows. It was so different from the glittering, isolated penthouse Tae-jin had once called home. But this felt real. "Thank you," Tae-jin said suddenly. Claire looked up at him, For what? For speaking that night, he said. For breaking me. For showing me what love really means. Claire smiled, linking her arm through his. You broke me too, in the best way possible. They walked home through the Brooklyn streets, a small family against the backdrop of the city. No servants, no luxury cars, no empire to manage, just love. And that was everything. What do you think? Did Claire make the right choice in giving Taejin a second chance? How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales of love and redemption. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.